Today we're building this. A simple evening project or Saturday morning project. It's a ladder shelf, basically about 5 foot tall. Just something nice for your home. Just a simple painted shelf for storage for a closet or bathroom, even a kitchen. So let's get building. So what we're building today is this. It's basically a kind of called a ladder shelf. The one in this picture here mounts into the wall, but I'm building a freestanding one. Very similar to this with a couple of improvements and a couple of small design element changes. So to start off with, we start with a drawing here, a little sketch. I normally don't sketch out things real detailed. I kind of have it in my mind when I start doing something, but on this project here, I wanted to sketch it out to show y'all what I'm doing. So this is a side view of the item. I've got one, the back legs go about 60 inches up, front legs about 64 inches. And here's my shelves here. I've got them progressively going up. Each shelf's going to be about 2 inches deep. And the width's going to be about 14 inches because I'm doing this in a certain area where I only have so much room as far as in the house. Now down here at the bottom there's an angle. And the way I figured that angle was I used my graph paper here. Each square represents 2 inches. Take my protractor, and if you remember doing math in high school, that's all you got to do to find the angle. So I've got an angle of 100 degrees or 80 degrees depending on how you look at it. So this kind of gives me a good idea of where I'm starting from. Another important design element is this back leg is 2 inches wide. This front leg is 2 inches wide. I do not want that. That's not a good design element. I want the back leg to be narrower than the front leg. Give a little bit of visual, something visually a little bit better than just a boxy looking box. If you buy lumber at your big box store, you've got to plane it down to something that makes for a nicer design. And 2 inches, 2 inches, 2 inches, before you know it, what you have is a boxy looking cabinet. So I want these dimensions to be different in order to give it a little more, as far as a little more design to it. Now, also, to tell you about the dimensions, these legs are going to be between 1 to 2 inches wide and only a ½ inch deep. I want it to be thin enough so it just has a nice element to it. I don't want a thick boxy look. The boxes here, or the shelves rather, are going to be about 2 inches in depthness with about a ½ inch base to it and with a small lip on the front. So that's all this design here is, just kind of telling me where I'm going. The bottom shelf will be 16 inches, 14 inches, 12 inches, 9 inches, and 7 inches at the top. And the way I figured those heights was taking an imaginary line from here up to here and seeing what would be the best look. Between the shelves are anywhere between 14 to 12 inches. And I staggered the distance from here to here on the various shelves, again, to give it a nicer design. It sets about 6 inches off the ground as far as the first shelf. And again, as you can see, from here to here is different. Again, I'm not building a box, I'm building a little shelf unit. So this area here, we're going to take these drawings and take them over and start milling some lumber and getting this project ready. Now the lumber I'm using in this, or the wood I'm using in this particular project, is just a clear spruce or clear pine. This is going to be a painted project. It's not going to be stained, or it's not going to be finished naturally. It's going to be painted. What I'm building here isn't really a fine piece of furniture. It's just a nice shelf unit, okay? So with that, you can go to your lumber yard, just get some clear pine, or another good wood to use would be a poplar, because you can basically, that paints up and stains up really well. So what I'm going to do now with my lumber here, this is 1x6s, which is actually 3/4 by 5.5. And I'll be measuring these out for my rough cut. Your steps in woodworking is always rough cut, and then you plane your surfaces down to your depthness you want, And then you start fine cutting down to the particular dimensions or the shape you want, and then you start working on your assembly. So now I'm gonna do now is just measure out my rough cut. I know my my legs are gonna be about 50 inches or 60 inches on the back, with about an extra 3 or 4 inches for this piece here that's got the angle. So I'm gonna go about 64 inches. And that's gonna make my legs right there. So from there, I'm gonna start just doing some measuring, taking my drawings and kind of laying everything out to make sure I have the most best and efficient use of my lumber. So here's some of my rough pieces that have been cut for the legs and for the back pieces and so forth. From here, we're going to go over and we're going to start planing them. So let's look at the difference in a plain board and an unplaned board. This board here ran through the planer. It's now down to a little bit over about 5/8 of an inch from its original 3/4 of an inch. Compare that to the original board, quite a bit of difference. And also, if you look at the board itself, the surface, a good plain board with good planers, good planer knives, you can basically get that almost down to a finish grade as far as the surface. It's smooth, takes out all the raised grain in the wood. Just makes it for a much nicer product. Planer is a great tool to have to make lumber do what you want it to do. Okay, my next step is going to be to, with my sides to the shelves, square up one end. I cut these on the compound miter saw, and that doesn't always leave a perfect square. So I've made sure my saw is square, my blade is square to the fence and to the table, or to the table rather. And now I'm just going to work in here and cut one end to make sure it's perfectly square before I cut the exact length of my side pieces. So in this step, we're going to take a piece of 1/2 inch Baltic birch plywood to make our actual shelves. The shelves will be cut and the sides will be put on the ends and the back, and you'll see here in a few minutes exactly how that looks. But what I have to do is take my drawing here and then lay all this out to get the best and most efficient use of my plywood. To do that, I use a large square and also this fast cap tape. This is one of the best tape measures for woodworking. And the reason is, like a traditional tape measure, let me go over here and show you. A traditional tape measure, which is used for, you know, all kinds of projects, it's designed to go out, be stiff so that you can go out and catch the end of a board. And that's great for a lot of tasks you do. But how this is a different kind of tape measure is, one, as you pull it out, it's flat. So when you lay it across your wood, it truly gives you a flat surface in which to mark your dimensions. Neat invention. Now, good. Again, this isn't good for doing construction or carpentry work where you're pulling and you're trying to catch the end of a board because it's flexible. Okay, but for doing a finer measurement, it's a great product. And that's not a commercial. I don't get paid by them or anything. It's not like I'm getting rich off of selling these, but just if you're looking for a neat tape measure for woodworking, definitely recommend this. So again, we're going to lay this out, mark all of our shelf layout. After that, we're going to go over and cut it on the table saw. So what I've done, I've ripped down some pieces of wood, about 5/8 by a little bit less than 1/4 inch, to go in the front of my shelves. Because, you know, the front of the shelf is plywood, and you don't want to see that. You can never finish that unless you put either a veneer or a piece of wood over it. So when I made this, it's a little bit proud, meaning it's got a little bit of a lip to it, so that it's got a nice detailed element. And also, if you put something on the shelf, it basically can't roll off. So to start with this, take my wood glue, and you don't need a lot of wood glue. A lot of folks put way too much glue on. Just a thin layer, especially on plywood, because plywood absorbs the glue pretty well and makes a pretty good joint. Take my strip, the wide side down on there, hold it in place for a minute, kind of make sure it's flush on each end, and that is just about perfect. Make sure it's flush on the top there. And then take my brad nailer, pop a brad in, a little 3/4 inch brad right there, and one right there. Always move your fingers away when you're doing that so you don't get a brad in your finger in case it follows the grain of the wood. And there we go. And that's that piece right there. So I can fill those holes in a little later, because this is a painted piece, not a stained piece. So let's do the rest of the shelves. Now here's the sides to my shelves. I've got them lined up in order. And what I want to do, I want to take and put a curved little round over edge right here for a nice little detail. I'm going to do that on my bandsaw, but I want to make sure when I cut these two that they're cut together so they're even. A simple way of doing that is taking two-sided tape and then taping the two pieces together. And once we tape these together, we'll take them over to the bandsaw and you'll see what I'm talking. So I've done now using a compass, pencil, and a little combination square marking the center, and I've drawn a small semicircle right there on all 5 pieces that will compose the sides of the 5 shelves. Now the bandsaw here, I'll simply start cutting these out. The drum. So there's the finished cut. It's rough. It needs to be sanded down. I'll take it over to the drum sander, run it across there, and I'll have myself a good clean cut. Okay, now it's time to assemble a shelf. So to start, we're going to take, we have our shelf with the front piece glued on a brad nail. We're going to put our piece that we cut the round over on. I'm going to dry fit these, make sure they all fit well. And they do. So our first step is going to be to take one side, put a good ribbon of glue on that side. Take one of our end pieces, put it into place there. Now I am using a little bit more glue on this piece here, because as the legs are mounted to this, there'll be some stress on this. But when you build a tray like this, There's a lot of structural integrity in here, just from the sides of the wood being glued to the base. So I make sure the back is perfectly flush. I'm gonna take a square, make sure, because your eyes aren't always right. Go to the front, make sure it's perfectly square. Hold that in place for a minute, let that glue set real well. Take my brad nailer, pop a brad in there, pop one in there, and pop one up close to the front, but not too close to the front. I don't want to split. Turn the other side over. And again, we're going to do the same thing. Get some of that sawdust off of there. New ribbon of glue. Take my other piece, make sure it matches. Also, when you glue wood, if you're gluing pine versus a hardwood or a oak or a maple or sapele or mahogany or something like that, it does take a different amount of glue. You know, softer woods tend to absorb more glue than maybe a hardwood does, just at least in my opinion. Okay, got that nice and flush. So I tend to use a little bit more glue sometimes on a soft piece of wood. All right, that's nice right there. So let's put a brad in right there. One right here in the back. And now we'll turn the thing on its back. Make sure it's clean. Glue these flanges here. Glue across the back. Take my back piece, the really good side facing in. Get that in place there, and that's pretty good. Once I brad this, I'll take a rag and wipe down any excess glue I might have had squeezed out. A little damp rag there. Brad that right there. Come over here to this corner, get that nice and flush. Put a brad in there. These are 1-inch brads that I'm using here. So here's what I've done. I've laid out the legs on my table saw. And I've basically taken a square, put here, mark the distance from my drawing out, place the other leg, and made a corresponding line to get that angle, that 80-degree angle. And I did the same thing up on the other end up here as well, okay? So with that, then I took a bevel angle or an angle gauge here and set that angle over here on that, so then I can adjust my saw to cut that proper angle. Okay, what I've done now, I've taken my back legs to the shelf unit. Take my tape measure. I've drawn down where all the shelves will be, and then I marked them along the way. Both legs, one on the left, one on the right. Mark where the shelves are going to go. Then I put these marks here. And here what I'll do is I'll take a 3/8 inch Forstner bit, countersink a hole here for the screws that attach to the shelves. Once I've done that, I'll put the shelves in. I'll then take one of these hardwood plugs, put over it, so there's no screws exposed or shown at all. So again, I've taken from one end to the other. I've marked where all the shelves will mount. Next, we'll start drilling the holes and start putting it together. As you can see here, the Forstner bit and the plug, you can see the depthness of the plug. So I don't want to drill so deep that the plug gets countersinked into the wood, but I want it to be just a little bit proud like that. And that's about the same width as my bit itself. So I know if my drill gets to the top of this, I've gone far enough. Now here I'm marking 2.5 inches in, so I know where the front of the leg will be, and so when I put glue down, I want to get glue on any surfaces that don't need glue. Mark 2.5 inches in, then come back and mark 1 inch in, so I have my width precise. As I've done that, take my glue bottle, I've got my holes pre-drilled, and I can start fastening the screws to this. And I want to talk about the screws for a second. Typically, I use either a KRG fastener, which is a great fastener for wood. It's got like a star head to it. Or I use a Craig square drive type fastener. These are superior for woodworking. However, since I'm going through really thin stock, it's hard to find these for that size, so I'm having to use a common 3/4 inch Phillips head screw. I'm not a fan of these Phillips head screws at all. I like the KRGs because the star drive really bites into the wood better. I like the Craig fasteners with a square head, and the thread on this, it's self-tapping. It just makes a much better grab. So I'm not compromising. I just don't like using Phillips head, these small little nickel screws like this. But since I'm going through pretty thin stock, into thin stock, that's kind of what I'm stuck with. Now as I'm screwing these together, I want to make sure my reference lines line up. I have glue beneath here. Take a combination square to make sure the shelf is also square this way and this way. That's a perfect 90 degrees. So I have that there, because wood does torque and move around on you a little bit, so you have to do that. Seated good. All right. Move down to the next one. Now that the screws are in, put a little dabble of glue in each hole. And set our wood plugs in there. And the wood plugs basically will fill in that hole nice and tight. And you hear in the background, my grandson is mad right now. And there you go. And when those dry, we'll take a sander to that and make it nice and flush along with sanding the entire piece. Well, here it is, kind of rough assembly put together. Still got to do some sanding, do a lot of trim work, just clean everything up, put in, fill in the holes for the wood filler here, sand all this, and then tomorrow I think we'll start giving this some paint. So, and you'll see it all finished.